My name is Antonio Lopez. I'm the regional administrator for Franklin and Jefferson. And tonight, in the hour that we have three objectives. And the objective is to review the enrollment and balancing process. The second, to describe the two options for the Jefferson Pre-K cluster, the community engagement plan, and lastly, to listen to your questions and feedback. So we're going to start with, this is a cycle that you have seen, and right now we are in the listening and proposal. We will move into the decide, and eventually to the implementation, and then we start that cycle again in terms of assessing whether the implementation was successful. So as you can see, we're in the right in the middle. We're ready for the next step, and like Superintendent Smith described, there is a process, and then eventually it will be coming to this board for a vote, for a decision.
Dr. Dare, I was wondering if these were...
Oh, okay. We do have this set up in a process for how we're going to do this. Basically, what we're going to talk about today in terms of the process of how we came down to the two scenarios, we looked at, after listening to all of the input from the variety of audiences, internal, external stakeholder groups, and in multiple venues and forums, we did decide on a couple of things and prioritized around a couple of things. But things to keep in mind is that we know that the balancing of enrollment by itself is not going to improve student achievement. That what we're looking for are numbers that would get to the point in the Jefferson cluster so that every year annually we would not have to be reducing staff because we don't have sufficient numbers in the building to be able to maintain the programs that we have in place. So in setting the priorities for these last two options, we basically came up with a way of balancing enrollment in two different strategies that would give us significant enough numbers so that the resources that go with the numbers, once you get them, could be stabilized no matter which one of the two processes. The focus is on academic achievement and the acceleration of achievement and the elevation of achievement. The other focus is on making certain that all students have access to programs that we have already know will prove to be effective across the cluster, so we're not looking at new things, some new idea that we dreamt up, but ideas that have proven to be effective in this cluster. And we are also looking at establishing a sense of having students recognizing that pre-K through 12 is the trajectory for college choices and post-secondary options, that you don't start at 9th grade to begin talking to students and getting them to start thinking about what they might want to do once they exit the K-12 arena. So over the years, because the numbers in the cluster have fluctuated, that has led to programmatic instability, staffing instability, and the inability to get these programs that we know are good things for kids in place long enough to get the results that we would like to have happen. So the cluster, once again to remind you, are the 8 schools that have guaranteed enrollment to the Jefferson Middle College, and we are also talking about the Humboldt and Tumboldt buildings. King and Ockley Green have low enrollment at all the grades, Fabian, Vernon, and Woodlawn, lower upper grade enrollment, and Beach, Chief Joe, Fabian, limited class space across the building. And Boise Elliott Humboldt has the potential for crowding in future years. Without changes, we would see that constant up and down and sway that has been impacting this cluster for a number of years now. So once again, as I said, we are going to try and right-size these two proposals, right-size the school to make certain that we have strong academic support. The emphasis is on the quality of middle schools across all of the input that we got. Consistently, one of the things that we heard was, things are great, we like our primary grades, or we really like this, but every school, every audience spoke to needing to strengthen, even if they were pleased with what was happening, they knew that they needed to have a much more robust middle grades program in all of the schools. We also want to make sure that the enrollment changes will result in something that's an outcome of equitable and high quality academic programs. In other words, why do the change if it isn't going to improve the academics in the building? And as I said, linkages to the high school curriculum and access to college and post-secondary opportunities. Of course, we would like all of our students in the Jefferson cluster to feed Jefferson High School. We're proud of that school, we support that school, but if they make other choices, we obviously want them to be successful no matter where they go. And so we're looking at advanced placement at other high school options, and other higher education partners are linking with us, like the PhD to 3 piece with Concordia. We are looking for kids to be able to be academically successful so they can take advantage of any option that comes their way. And of course, we want to nurture a college-going cluster across, this is hard to say, college-going culture across the cluster. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay, who put that sentence in there? All right, so here's the process. Do you want to do the process, Judy?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Okay, so as Superintendent Smith said, we began the process in the summer, but actively since the fall, we've held a number, about 20 formal meetings. We released 6 scenarios for feedback. We received about 250 written comments on those scenarios alone, and over 600 written comments so far. All of those comments are documented in binders that are in the board office. And as we continue to get them, we'll continue to update that body of information. We now are at the point, as you heard, and we'll be talking about tonight, we have 2 options where we've culled down the feedback on the scenarios to 2 workable sets of change. We're proposing 6 meetings, and we'll run through that list again. There's a few things that maybe are even changed since earlier. Looking towards the superintendent's recommendation and then your actions coming next. So this is just a quick reminder that we have different types of tools that we can use in enrollment balancing that make different kinds of changes. And some of them, such as changing the transfer policy, tightening down transfers, or making boundary changes, are what we call slow change. So it can right size over time, but it doesn't bring a lot of immediate impact, particularly when you're looking at the middle grades, because we start things like boundary change at kindergarten, and it has the biggest impact at the lower grades. It takes years in a K-8 school before you see that impact in the upper grades. Other things such as grade reconfiguration, consolidation, and closure does cause existing students to move. So it's more impact immediately, it's more disruption, but you get bigger results. And of course, we always look at things like facility changes options as well, but as we know, we're limited due to cost. And so that's just the framework of changes that we're designing these options within. And finally, I just wanted to mention, as you've heard, we're focused on strengthening the middle years. We're looking at having at least 2 classrooms per grade level in a K-8, even in those grades 6, 7, and 8, which means you need more kids at the lower grades. So trying to right-size schools in an effective way is an important part of this, and in a way that crosses all of those grades. We would look at it having at least 6 classrooms per grade level in a middle school, which is 3 to 4 feeder schools, and at this point there's no middle school in the cluster now. Okay, all that preamble. We would now like to describe for you the 2 options. You've received a packet of information that includes maps, and hopefully those will be visible where you are. I'm going to put some on the screen here. I don't know how helpful they're going to be, so let me know later if any of this information up here isn't visible. Okay, so in the first option, our focus is on maintaining the K-8 structure that exists in the cluster now, but consolidating in a couple of, particularly taking 3 schools and consolidating down to 2 in order to increase access to programs for students. So in this change, Chief Joseph, Ockley Green, and Woodlawn come together next year as a single pre-K-8 school that operates on 2 campuses. With this, the Woodlawn building would close. After that point, the boundary for Woodlawn would be divided between Chief Joseph, Ockley Green, King and King and Vernon, and additionally, the Access program currently at Sabin would move to King. So visually, here's what this looks like with, not sure that's going to work very well. So you see the Woodlawn campus closing, the boundary, the potential boundary change in the portion of the Woodlawn boundary that would become part of the Chief Joseph Ockley Green boundary, the portion that would become part of the King boundary, and the portion that would become part of the Vernon boundary. And you see Ockley Green and Chief Joseph becoming a dual campus single school. That would serve probably grades pre-K through 8. You see access coming into King and a small boundary change that over time builds enrollment at Vernon. One of the questions that you may have is, why would Woodlawn be the school that we would look at for a closure in this scenario? We visited Woodlawn a couple of times this fall, made many other visits there. The regional administrator, the former regional administrator. There are a lot of strengths and values in Woodlawn. Teachers, parents, students working very hard on achievement. Other factors that we see, though, are that a capture rate in their neighborhood area that's chronically low, that's hovering at around 40%. So more than half of the students who live in their neighborhood continue to make other choices. And even though they've seen growth at the lower grades, it's still so low and so suppressed. It's going to take a long time for those changes to impact the upper grades where the sizes are smallest. In addition, we see continuing low achievement data, and we understand that that means that we have to accelerate and elevate our academic efforts in that school. It makes it much, much harder to do that at the middle grades when their numbers are really low. So we see that we need a more immediate change in order to give students the access to programs that will nurture that academic success. There are other possibilities we want to quickly mention aligned with this option. As you can see, we have no direct change for Beach, Boise Elliott Humboldt, or Fabian in this option. However, there are possibilities that in the future there could be immersion changes that are aligned with the district's immersion plan, and that could have an impact on Beach in some way. Boise Elliott Humboldt could look at moving to the Tubman campus in the future. Fabian is slated to receive portable classrooms in advance of its full modernization and continue its partnership with Concordia on 3 to PhD. There are additional boundary changes that we could look at in the future to right-size neighborhoods within those schools. So there are some unusual aspects to their neighborhoods that we would be happy to go in and clean up once we get these major structural decisions made. Humboldt could become a regional early learning center in 2014 or later. We want to align that overall early learning center plan for the Jefferson cluster and the rest of the district with state objectives and you'll see more of that coming later. In the interim, we believe that all the schools that have pre-K now will maintain pre-K so long as funding is still available for that. And finally, we want to say that it's important to probably look at our high school dual assignment choices for future students and make sure that they're appropriately lined. Again, once we make these important structural decisions, these are the types of changes that could come behind. Quickly, by the numbers, here are estimated enrollment impacts. You can see what the current enrollment is at each school, what the estimated enrollment would be if we did nothing, and what the change would be. I probably should have just highlighted the schools that change and not those that stay the same. But you can see particularly the Chief Joseph line is the line for the combined Chief Joseph, Ockley Green, and Woodlawn. So about 1,100 students divided between the Chief Joseph and Ockley Green campus. Allows us to fully utilize both of those schools. Ockley Green would be full for the first time in a long time. Chief Joseph would not be overcrowded so long as we could make grade structure changes that made the most of the larger building, still serving, Chief Joseph serving for the lower grades. You see King growing both from the inclusion of access and from the beginning effects of the boundary change. 636, we still believe that there's some room for growth between the King boundary and the access program. And then Vernon continuing to grow through an enlarged neighborhood and also through increased capture rates. So what you've seen then is we have immediate program access improvements, particularly for Woodlawn, Chief Joseph, Ockley Green, and King students. We have slow but steady growth for Vernon. This option does require that we close a school. It requires that we develop a strong shared campus model. And It'll mean that we'll have additional transportation needs, including some students who are now walkers to their current school. Other specific resource impacts will be modeled if this option becomes the superintendent's recommendation. So we would imagine that there are many more questions that you might have and community members might have, and we will do our best to resolve those questions as soon as we are able to sort out which of these options indeed is going to be moving forward. So that's my brief summary on option 1. I'd like to turn to option 2. This is another way of leading to similar outcomes, but using different structures and impacting different schools. So it brings a middle school back into the cluster, as well as ensures that the remaining K-8s are programmatically strong. Certainly if you're bringing strong middle grades competition to schools nearby, you want to make sure that the K-8s that are left are ready to stand up to that competition. In this, the current Ockley Green school would close at the end of this year and then reopen in 2014 as a junior middle college school serving grades 6 through 8. So that would require a planning year. And during that time, current Ockley Green students would move to Woodlawn. Many of them are from other neighborhoods because in grades K through 5, it's a focus option choice. So the students would also have the right to return to their neighborhood school if they preferred that. We also would need a location for the Ockley Green neighborhood 6th grade, so the kids that are from the Chief Joseph neighborhood for 5th grade, and that could be Woodlawn. There's also the option, if that doesn't work, of portables on the Chief Joseph campus, but that comes with cost. In addition to that change, that is to setting a middle school at Ockley Green that's fed by 4 schools. Did that slide name the 4 schools? No. Why don't I name those 4 schools? They would be Beach, Boise Elliott, Chief Joseph, and Woodlawn. In addition to that, King and Vernon would consolidate into a single school, an International Baccalaureate school. Both of those schools currently have that program. It would be a larger and more robust school under this change. We envision 2 ways that that consolidation could happen. The first, the most abrupt, the most traditional, is that one of the schools closes, all the students go to the largest building. That would likely be King, and then we would do boundary changes to make sure that that neighborhood was right-sized to fit that one building. But we also want to continue some of our out-of-the-box thinking and recognizing the programmatic alignment that already happens with those schools, and that we'd like to find another home for Access, which is right now at Sabin. We would also propose that it's possible to have both campuses remain open in a shared campus model, similar to what I just described for Ockley Green and Chief Joseph, and that the Access Academy, their grades 1 through 8, would exist on one of those 2 campuses. And as I said, if we go with a traditional consolidation, we would have to do boundary changes. So I'm going to flip to the map here, and you see the 4 feeder schools feeding into Ockley Green. You see the shift for Ockley Green current students onto the Woodlawn campus beginning next year, and then Ockley Green open in 2014. You see our either-or way of consolidating King and Vernon that may include Access or may not. And you see the potential for some boundary changes that might have to be made if we go with the traditional consolidation. King becomes the new school, the Vernon building closes. The boundary changes would likely have to move through Fabian, and Fabian isn't a school that can accept more students for several years. So there's some complexities that could come with that. One of the questions that you might have, or I just wanted to spend another minute on this detail that's in this particular option of our request for a planning year to develop our middle school model. It's a traditional method for opening a new school where you take the time to hire your administrator, select your curriculum, build your relationships both with your feeder schools and with the high school that you're going to be sending students to, build up your marketing strategy, give your feeder schools time to adapt, and then you go ahead and open the school. So those are some of the things that we're looking for here. We believe that that time will be extremely valuable in getting that new school off to a strong start. Again, some future possibilities that I mentioned before exist as well with this plan, including future possible changes with immersion. The Fabian plan remains largely the same under this as it did what I described before. We might still have additional boundary changes between some smaller neighborhood areas. The Early Learning Center potential exists, and the need, no doubt, to realign our high school dual assignment choices, or at least examine them, make sure that they're still appropriate after we decide these structural changes. The impacts that we believe come with this option are improved access to our middle grades programs and to high school and beyond, that it really galvanizes the notion of a junior middle college as a theme that drives that college-ready cluster-wide, you're right, that's hard to say, across the area. There's strength in a planning year, but it does require additional staff and student movement. It requires us to decide to either close our school or develop a dual campus model. That'll be additional transition and transportation for many students. And there are other specific resource impacts that will be modeled if this is the option that becomes the superintendent's recommendation. Finally, by the numbers, you see Beach, Boise Elliott, Chief Joseph, and Woodlawn as our feeder schools.
It's K-5s.
K-5s. That doesn't include their pre-K. If you look at, for example, Chief Joseph at 513, Woodlawn at 444, like if under this model, that's a place where a boundary change might make sense, might be just enough to build Woodlawn right to the size that we would want and provide a little more space at Chief Joseph, which is full right now. So that's an example of how a future boundary change might support this overall structure change. You see the middle school in 2015 with 522 students in it. What's going on in the cluster right now is that you have significantly higher numbers of students in grades 4 and below. So for that first year, I mean, we can count how many kids are attending the schools in those clusters, and we see that it may start with a relatively small, like 6th grade, but it'll grow over time. So starting with about 480 in the first year, 522 on the way up to 600. This would have an opening 6th grade class of about 200 students, which is what we look for in our middle school model. Okay, so that is the brief summary, and then I'm going to quickly go over where we are with the... Yeah.
Okay. So today we met with the staff, so 4 schools, Oakley Green, Chief Joseph, Woodlawn, and Vernon. The principal, we're going to talk to the other schools. And what you have right now is the plan in terms of how we're going to take these options to the community. And as you can see, we're going to be pretty busy in the next 2 weeks. So we have a variety of meetings in the different schools. We have on January 22nd, we're meeting with the planning team that helped us in the beginning in terms of the planning. We meet on the 23rd with the ESL families. You see that we're meeting with King and Access, and then on January 26th, we have the community forum. That will be at Jefferson. We also have a meeting with all the special education families. We have an online survey that runs through the 28th, in which the community can give us ideas or feedback about this process. And one thing that we always that we keep in mind is how do we make sure that we hear from the families that for some reason or another historically we have not heard from, especially families of color. I mean everyone, but how do we intentionally go and look for the families that historically have not been represented? How do we also engage our partners? And we have a meeting with the partners, with the ministers, and the community in terms of we want to hear their voice. And also including the different organizations like the local churches, SEI, the Latino Network, IRCO, and those organizations.